This next series, we're going to be continuing on looking at the planetary combinations, planetary yogas, and we're going to be looking at Mars in particular. Before we get into that, I would like to take some time to make some announcements. We will be starting the next apprenticeship course, which is the beginning of a 4-year foundational course in astrology. Next February, so coming up in a few months. Space is limited to 30 participants, so if you're interested, go to AshevedicaStrology.com and go to the section, the tab that says Astrological Apprenticeship Course. So we will be taking students between now and January for that year-long course. That'll be year one. There'll be 3 years after that, but you got to take year one first. So you can read more at AshevedicaStrology.com under the Astrology Apprenticeship Course tab. Also, coming up in about 2 weeks, we'll be doing the weekend webinar on the Vargas, or the divisional charts. At this time, we have about 6 spaces left. And again, it's limited spaces. We usually have about 27 to 30 people, and that keeps it kind of cozy, and we can have some decent interaction. So that'll be coming up in 2 weeks. If you're interested in that, we've got 6 spaces left. Again, go to AshevedicaStrology.com and go to the Events tab for more information on that. But anyway, we might talk a little bit more about that before we get there. But today, we're going to be going through the planetary combinations and yogas of Mars. And I decided that it was appropriate for me to wear this backyard barbecue t-shirt for Mars. This is a shirt that I won in a pizza cook-off, actually. So it's red, related to Mars. I won it. Mars is very competitive, related to Mars. And it deals with barbecue and cooking, which Mars is a very hot planet. And oftentimes, when you've got a good Mars, the person will be good in the kitchen, good with knives, good with working with fire and things of that nature. So, in honor of Mars, we're wearing the 5th annual Backyard Barbecue Cook-Off t-shirt that I won in a pizza cooking contest. But anyway, so we're going to go over Mars and Mercury, Mars and Jupiter, Mars and Venus, Mars and Saturn, Mars and Rahu, and Mars and Ketu in this series. I've already spoken to Mars and the Moon and Mars and the Sun in previous videos. So if you're interested in those conjunctions of Mars, go back to previous videos, particularly the series on the Moon and the series on the Sun. So where do we want to start? Well, as always, we want to start with Mars and Mercury. Mars and Mercury is an interesting combination because Mars only has one enemy. Mars only has one enemy when it comes to natural planetary friendships. And who is that enemy to Mars? But it happens to be Mercury. No other planet is an actual enemy to Mars. Even Saturn is not considered to be an enemy to Mars. Saturn is a natural neutral to Mars. So unless Saturn and Mars are together, it's possible that these two planets can work well. But what happens when we get Mars and Mercury together? And with this combination, with this conjunction, what I'm paying attention to specifically is when we have Mars and Mercury in the same sign, when we have Mars in the sign of Mercury, Mars in Virgo, Mars in Gemini, or when we have Mercury aspecting Mars, planetarily aspecting Mars. This is what we're talking about. So this is not Mars's influence necessarily to Mercury. This is more about Mercury's influence to Mars. Now, of course, there will be some overlap because anytime you're in a relationship, it's a two-way street. So the influences, when we get Mars and Mercury together, they're going to combine both of these planetary combinations. But what is Mars? Mars is logic. Mars is energy. Mars is taking the initiative. Mars is decisiveness. Mars represents the soldier. Mars can deal with fire, with cutting things, with injury, with death. Not death in the sense of Saturn, where you see the old rotten skeleton, but the thing that kills you. That can be Mars. And what is Mercury? Mercury deals with the mind. Mercury deals with our wit. our speaking capacity, our engineering capacity. When we get Mars and Mercury together, oftentimes we'll have a very deep, incisive mind, a very logical mind. We can see a person who might have very good mechanical skills or very quick reflexes. Mars and Mercury can also get one involved in medical work, specifically things that deal with surgery. It gives a person great problem-solving abilities. Now, these are all the positive things. This is if both Mars and Mercury are situated in such a way in the chart that they are working well. We mentioned earlier in this particular talk that Mercury is an enemy to Mars. Now, what does that mean? Well, for a more detailed analysis about these Mars combinations, I'd highly encourage you to go to the Saptarishis astrology channel, because we recently did a 45-minute discussion on the Avashtas of Mars. But for our purposes here, we'll stick with some very basic points. And that is, number one, that Mars likes to get things done quickly, efficiently, incisively, definitively. Mars is one of the fastest moving planets when it comes to changes that it can make within the chart. Mercury is the mind. Mercury is the thinking process. Mercury is the ability to go through and say, okay, here are all my options. Here are all my possibilities. Here's all the research that I've done. Here's how I understand all the opportunities that I have before me. And when you take Mars and you mix it up with Mercury, Mars loses potentially its ability to act on instinct. It's to follow its gut. It loses its ability to go into battle and to see, all right, I need to deal with this opponent, I need to dodge this bullet, I need to do these sorts of things. When a warrior or a fighter goes into battle, they're not necessarily thinking everything through. They're acting on instinct. They're acting on a greater intelligence, which is guiding them, and hopefully to win. And when you get Mercury in the mix, what occurs is the person overthinks things. The person goes into the fight, and instead of letting their natural training come through, because Mars represents training, and that's why people often say, you train, you practice like you're going to perform. You train and practice like you're going to perform. That way when you get into the situation, your body automatically knows what to do, whether it's playing a musical instrument, whether it's weightlifting, whether it is fighting, whether it is attending to business strategies, these sorts of things. You have to practice and train first, and you get Mercury involved, and all that training goes out the window a little bit, because now you're in the midst of it. You're in the situation that requires your decisive gut reaction, and you're thinking through all the problems that could have come up, and then you end up being paralyzed. So this is why Mars and Mercury can be very good for scientists, can be very good for people who need to have mechanically related occupations, engineering, quick problem-solving abilities. It can be very good for this, but you have to train that Mars well. Otherwise, what happens is Mercury comes in inappropriately. And Mercury, when you're in the heat of the moment, gives you all these possible things that could go wrong or that you have to think about. And you end up not responding because you're thinking Mercury rather than acting. So this is one of the reasons why Mercury is considered to be an enemy to Mars, because Mercury gets in the way of Mars's ability to act instinctively, decisively, to take action right now in the heat of the moment. That's how Mars functions. That's why Mars, when it comes to your illnesses and your health, represents those acute things like fevers that come upon you to burn off the illness. It's not long-term treatments. It's very precise, surgical, immediate, acute care. That's why when you break a bone, you go to the ER, and then that Mars comes in and resets your bone so that you can survive from that point forward. So Mercury gets in the way of this. So some of the negative aspects when we get this Mars-Mercury combination could be too mentally stimulated. It can show a mind that's moving too fast but is never coming to any kind of decision. It can make a person mentally angry and frustrated because they're never able to settle on one course of action. It can make a person ambitious, too ambitious that is, too self-centered and even ruthless in how they work through their problems in life. And Mars, again, is not a ruthless planet when he's working well. We have to remember this. He is the soldier that attends to the problem when it's there, but he doesn't go above and beyond. So it's like you have people invading your country, and the soldier is the defense that comes up and says, I'm going to defend my country and I am going to annihilate my enemies. But that's it. He's not the kind of person that becomes mentally perverse that says, I'm going to defend my country and then I'm going to go mutilate all the bodies and dishonor them. Mars is a very honorable planet. And so when we get Mercury involved, too much thinking comes into play. This is why it can be sometimes very difficult to have Mars-Mercury combinations or to interact with Mars-Mercury people because, number one, they'll hardly never come to a decision that they're really happy about. They'll always overly question and overly analyze things, and they're never able to trust their gut. So with Mars-Mercury combinations, if it's not working well for you, one of the best things to do is start finding ways to put yourself in situations to trust your gut, to start training to prepare for what's happening. I used to be involved in some martial arts activities, and I found that I would always lose because I would go in and I would always have this plan of how it should be, because Mars deals with these sort of shoulds and shouldn'ts, and I would have all these potential ideas of what's going to happen when I get into this, martial arts experience. And always I would get there and I would start thinking about all the possibilities and I would immediately lose. And I had to train myself through time. To practice ahead of time different moves and situations that I would be in. But then when I got into the actual experience, to trust my gut and turn off my mind, to turn off my Mercury, and to just go with instinct. And when I did that, I began winning nearly every time. Now, that was with people who were of similar skill level. Of course, when I came up against people of greater skill level, I still lost a lot. But what I found was, as part of my problem, was the overthinking. And that's because I do have a significant impact of Mercury to my Mars. So I had to learn to train myself, a Martian thing, training, to start trusting my gut and being okay making mistakes. And then when I did that, my experiences in martial arts and so on became much better. I became much more skilled in what I was doing. So you can take that to many different things. When it comes to having arguments with people, when it comes to debating people, a very Mars-Mercurial kind of influence, again, the key is to learn to trust your gut and to not try to overthink things or over-manipulate the situation or things of this nature, because that's where Mercury and Mars typically goes wrong. The other thing with Mars and Mercury is learning to do the best job you can and then let it go. You have to set yourself a limit, a point, where you say, okay, I've done my best, I give it up. If mistakes occur, I will learn from those mistakes and apply them in the next go-around. So Mars and Mercury has to be okay with making mistakes and revising their approach, rather than just always trying to do the same wrong thing, the same wrong mental pattern over and over and over again. So this is quite a lot on Mars and Mercury. Usually Martian-related conversations go much quicker than this. But again, what we see is there's been a lot of thinking involved, a lot of reiteration, a lot of repetitiveness, if I can get it out, during this discussion about Mars and Mercury. And that's kind of exactly how Mars and Mercury works. All right, so next up, we'll look at Mars and Jupiter.